webinar on technology in physical education. We're really excited to have some special guests today exploring how we might use technology in PE. So we have Risto, Dylan and Ray. So over to you guys. Would you like to introduce yourselves and give a bit of a background to yourselves?
Yep. So I'll start. Risto Marttinen. I'm a professor at George Mason University, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. In the USA. And so my background, I grew up in Finland, actually. Went through my doctoral education with these two fine individuals at Teachers College at Columbia University. And most of my research focuses on integration of technology and academic subjects into physical education, and also looking at educational after-school programs in low-income communities in mostly urban settings.
Tene koto. My name's Dylan Landy. I'm an assistant professor at Towson University, which in the UK is equivalent to like a lecturer. We just have different languages here. So if you hear professor, I'm not that good. I did my master's at Teachers College with Ray and Risto over here. And then I did my PhD at the University of Auckland, which is in New Zealand. My research focuses on socio-critical issues around health education, physical education, and sexuality education. In particular, how can we move the field forward by drawing on sociological analyses and applying them to different methods and methodologies to shift the field from quote unquote the same thing.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you to Dr. Goodyear for having us on the webinar. My name is Ray Frederick. I am an assistant professor at Queens College, City University of New York. And as Risto and Dylan alluded to, went through the same master's as well as doctoral program at Teachers College, Columbia. My research focus is on teaching and learning in physical education with a particular emphasis on urban communities.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So one of the key questions that we've had just come through is people have had links to your research papers on technology, and they have asked if you could tell us a little bit more about your research on technology.
A little bit more about your research on technology.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of this started with Ray and I working together when I was doing my dissertation. We worked to develop this unit that was called the Fitness Integrated with Technology Unit, which is the kind of the topic of the base of this paper, and then the other paper that was just published in Research Quarterly and Exercise and Sport. And what we wanted to do with that curriculum model or unit, however you kind of describe it, I think our push was to use technology to teach students about what physical activity is like, what a healthy lifestyle is like, instead of using it specifically to monitor students' physical activity. So this is something that Ray and I created back in 2014, 2015. And we've been kind of honing ever since. So happy to discuss more about that, or Ray, you can jump in as well.
Yeah, I'll just really quickly add a piece to what Risto kind of just went over again. I think we were working maybe on a number of projects at that time. We also.
Is he gone?
Yeah, I think he paused out.
So he paused out. So I guess I'll hop on while he pops out.
Am I on?
Now you are.
Yes.
I don't know what happened. I'm sorry.
Do you know, can I just say this is a webinar on technology and PE, and this is the first time we've had a technology involved.
Right. So I don't know if you heard, I was mentioning, just piggybacking on what Risto put out there, but we also had another project in terms of integration. So a little bit of what we were doing is looking at integration in the sense of, dealing with primarily middle school students and looking at other areas around the curriculum in terms of, different terms for interdisciplinary learning going on in school spaces within the United States, but we wanted to look at how technology could be incorporated into the total school learning, teaching and learning process as well.
Okay, so Dylan, you were going to say something. Do you want to add to what you were going to say then?
Do you want to move on? It's up to you.
My next question was going to be, which you would probably was about to answer, was around if we could have an example of what you mean by technology integration. So what does it look like for a teacher or someone that doesn't necessarily know much about physical education? What do we mean by technology integration in practice?
Well, the project that the FIT unit project was integrating the use of wearable technology, so accelerometers, but that was hooked into a online portal that the students could interact with. So this specific piece of equipment was developed so you could create this kind of avatar. So as you were moving, you were gaining more points through the app, so they could go on and modify their avatar. So if you moved X amount of points or steps, you would end up getting you kind of like get some bonuses. So you could create a mohawk for your avatar. You could turn it blue or pink or green. So that was almost in a way to motivate them to be more physically active. But it was through that we wanted to teach them so they could learn, okay, not just going around and running along the track was physical activity. It was that, the recreational activities were something that they were gaining points on, which we were kind of trying to, again, not monitor the student, not saying you didn't get 10,000 steps or 15,000 steps and then label them as deficient. It was more about using that as a tool to teach them, hey, today was actually a really physically active day for you. What did you do? Oh, I went to, perfect stereotype here, I went to cheerleading practice. I didn't know that counted as physical activity. So those were kind of like the great highlights that we ended up getting from the project. But we definitely came up with a lot of barriers to that physical activity as well. And the teachers talked about it and the students all discussed that as well.
So I'm a sociologist by training. And when I think of physical activity in relation to technology, I think of it as a tool to reflect on how our built environment, and political structures are set up to help and or hinder physical activity or health. So I guess what major thing that I brought to this paper was that sort of external look, right? So how is health and technology being looked at from a sociological perspective? We talked about privacy and data rights, things like that, but also how some teachers use this as a tool to, for example, the cheerleading, to show how the school sponsors that. So if the school doesn't sponsor a cheerleading program, then the students aren't being physically active in particular ways because of that, right? So showing them that it's more than just an individual decision to be physically active, but rather there are policies in place, there are things in place within communities that augment the ability to be physically active in pleasurable ways that students can connect with in their lives.
Fantastic. So, technology is sometimes seen as a bridge between formal and informal contexts, but also it almost seems to be a bridge from what you're saying is different forms of physical activity, different policies. Could you expand around that then? So physical education or school's role is to help bridge these formal, informal spaces and help students move through different spaces in life. Is that what good technology integration is?
I think Ray, maybe you can speak to that. Ray was actually teaching at that time in a middle school, and he can kind of maybe talk about, yes, we might think that the role of the school is to facilitate this, but if we could also go into what's the role of parents or society in general, because some of our students were not allowed to download the app on their computer. So they were not allowed to then go home and interact with that data. Some of our teachers had never been into the computer lab. Some of our teachers didn't have access to computers, or if they were outside, they didn't have Wi-Fi capabilities. So, Ray, I think it would be interesting to hear from your point of view as a teacher during that time that we were doing this in one of these districts, to kind of explain a little bit about more from the schooling perspective.
Right. So with technology integration, I mean, it's a big push. I know in New York State. So in the United States, different districts, different states have different policy. Like going back to again what Dylan was referencing in terms of policy and how districts and how individual states decide to really create the environment for schools and school districts, even though LEAs or local educational agencies ultimately have authority over what their districts implement. Many in New York State have moved towards technology, and they have budgets for technology and integrating technology into all content areas, not only the core, what's considered core by definition. Physical education is now considered core, but really districts being able to now, I know for my district in particular that I was in at the time, we had a Chromebook initiative. Our district hadn't quite made it to the BYOD, which is bring your own device to school. But now, I guess fast forward 5 years later, I think all the districts in the county I was in now have some type of BYOD policy where students are allowed to bring either their district issued Chromebook or Apple technology device to school, or they can bring their own device that they may have at home. So going back to issues of access, I think many school districts have, not all, increased their capabilities in terms of offering technological capacity, which obviously brings us to a point where, like Risto said, teachers need some type of training and professional development, but many teachers and many people in society, obviously sometimes the schools are behind where society is in terms of being able to, I guess, navigate how to incorporate technology into the actual content and the discussions, and how students are basically interacting, socializing on a day-to-day basis. So just going back to our example, we didn't want to impose it upon teachers to use this technology, but obviously we were looking at certain research questions around the design, but generally just making it a natural fit into the environment with whatever schools had in terms of access to computers and students having access to technology in their home environment. I don't know if that really.
So I want to go back to your question about what is good pedagogy using technology. And I want to bring it back to what the teacher said. And that is, good use of technology means they're augmenting the program goals and philosophies, right? They're not replacing the goals of their philosophies, but rather they're being integrated in a way that augment what the teachers want to set out to achieve. If one of those things, as you say, Vicky, is creating a connection or building a connection or bridge between the school and the community itself, then yeah, let's go ahead and do that, right? And that should be the goal of schools. They should be embedded within their communities, and they should respect their community's values and culture. And specific in regards to social media, for example, there's a school in Auckland, New Zealand, it's Botany Downs, and they require all of their teachers to have a professional social media presence. And in this case, and it's a double-edged sword here, right? But parents can actually write to the teacher there, or the students can post something on the wall and create a discussion if it's Facebook or Twitter, keep going. Double-edged sword, where does the teacher's role end and begin, things like that. But that was the goal of the school, and social media allowed them to augment that goal because they wanted to be community-based. So it depends on what the goals of the schools are, in my opinion.
Now that is very, very interesting. So the webinar earlier on, we talked about Well, young people have said to us that teachers are very, very removed in terms of how they can support young people in their uses of social media. On the one hand, they try to give advice around how to use, for example, Snapchat. And the kids say, well, I doubt Miss So-and-so is on Snapchat. How can they tell me what to do? So they get frustrated in that respect. They get frustrated when the teachers turn around and say to them, turn off your devices, have a detox. When the teachers know nothing about having a detox and they see them in the staff room or the PE office on Facebook or Twitter at lunchtime. So what the young people have suggested to us is that you need to be relevant and have an approach. Now, the webinar earlier on today, the teacher had actually taken a digital detox himself. For Lent, he decided to give up his Facebook account. So when he's actually saying to the students, why don't you come off your phone stop being on your phone for a couple of hours, he's actually coming from an informed position and they can relate to him rather than him saying, put your privacy settings up and do that. So I suppose that is really, really interesting in connecting everything that you said together. It's around professional development, but this is something that teachers struggle with. It's very difficult to do. Do you have any top tips? When I try and do things, I try and give people top tips. What top tips would you give teachers about this?
Well, I think one of the interesting things in the data was that none of the teachers in our study talked about social media. So, we talked about technology. The whole conversation, the whole interview process was me trying to figure out what their perceptions were of the unit and what their perceptions were of using technology. And we always came back to technology in the way of how they're using their iPhone, not social media. They're texting all the time. And granted, this was 2014, but I think Facebook was around in 2014, 2015, like
I had
strong.
I had it.
So I do think that it is interesting that when we look at Twitter, so I'm on Twitter, I try to follow a bunch of people, but what I see teachers doing more and more is the Twitter is for other teachers. The audience is for other teachers. So not good pedagogy, but I think a lot of teachers go on Twitter to find out what to teach in their classes, right? It doesn't necessarily have to do with student learning. It's what recipe or what game can I play next time? What is the student learning in that? It could be helpful to get ideas, but I do think that, we're not engaging our students on social media. And we, as Pete educators as well, I work in a university, we didn't have Instagram until yesterday. Yesterday we decided as a group, we need to get on Instagram because we're missing an audience, right? We have 11 followers, huge following, right? But, we need to practice what we preach and figure out how to make that connection to the student, not just for educators. And I think that starts with trying to figure out how to engage students and maybe using a flipped classroom approach to give them ideas over the weekend. So if you like these games that we played this week, here's a reminder of how to play the rules on Twitter or Instagram. Here's how to develop this XYZ skill and a small video on how to practice this. Or these are things that you could teach your family members to teach them how to play this game with you.
So I'm fascinated by your concept of professional development and how to be quote unquote professionally developed, right? So when it comes to your research, for example, you draw from multiple fields. You draw from the field of technology, you draw from physical education. You've also drawn from psychological theories that I've seen around motivation and attitudes. And you've also drawn from sociocultural and sociocritical theories around sociology. So what we're finding here is that good research, good educational practices are not limited into one sort of column or tribe or territory, but rather they reach out to other areas in order to make their own area better. So how can we do that for technology? Well, we have to think about, physical educators are not exactly known to be quote unquote the most advanced with technology, right? So who are advanced? Well, kids are, so let's first ask them what they're doing and figuring out that. And then if we get something from them, we can then research it a little bit further. Maybe somebody that we know in the business world who might know something. We know software developers or people who work for different companies. I think it's time that we stop thinking about physical education as a subject by itself, but rather a culmination or an assemblage, one would say, of different fields of study that we can draw from at different times to make our field better. So to your point, I think we need to first start with the kids, see what they're doing, see what the community is doing, and then reach out to other professionals in different fields, and see what's going on there and what can we adopt and bring in.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. The youth perspective on technology is small. Everything's kind of, you look at most of the evidence that we would use to inform physical education is based on high numbered surveys where we don't actually get to young people's perceptions. Something's already been measured, and that's a form of bias on their perceptions. We're not actually getting to what are they engaging with and what are they doing. So we say start with youth perspectives. How can a teacher do that?
I think the first thing you do is you ask them, right? So I think that creating some sort of an assignment or creating some sort of opportunity for students to show off what they know and give them the opportunity to integrate it into their own class, have them create different activities. I think student-led and student-centered learning is good pedagogy, right? So having them develop these things and being aware that you're going to learn from them. There's a guy, son of a gun, Andres Gracie. He talks about how some of the best learning moments that he's had is when he was seduced, not in a sexual way, but in a desirous way, by their students. They were learning stuff from their students. And those were some of the most critical moments in class. And it's when they opened things up and said, we don't have to necessarily reach this outcome right now today. Let's allow students to drive the agenda and make it different. So allow your students, and don't see a binary between student and teacher, but rather see a student as a teacher and a teacher as a student, and you work together to produce new ways of health and physical education.
Okay, so we're getting some questions from our live group at the minute. So one of the questions is around social media in schools. So it sounded like from Ray, you were talking about how bring your own devices increased. In the UK, phones tend to be banned and social media tends to be banned. So is it quite an opposite situation in the States?
I do want to say it's really dependent on geographical location.
Yep.
Next to the school. So urban, suburban, low income, SES, social economic status, really the culture of the district, policy shifts, principals have, they work within policy to establish school-based policy. So it really is no one size fits all. I know in the particular district I was in the county I was in, where you have middle class to upper income families, principals want to match what they're seeing at home with what they're experiencing in school. So therefore you have a BYOD, whereas in maybe a lower income neighborhood where, and again, I don't want to make a stereotype, but I just want to speak reality. Risto and I, we also ran a program in a low income area of New York City. In that particular situation, a principal doesn't have as much maybe buy-in or trust. I don't want to say in our particular situation that was the case, but just you may have different elements going on where a principal feels like a BYOD or mobile technology doesn't fit with where they're trying to go with their school culture. So I guess it's culturally dependent on specific locations and geography.
Yeah, and during that same time, I was collecting data in New York City public schools, and we had the students were taking photos with their own phones, and literally they would bring in metal detectors to check for devices being brought in because they weren't supposed to bring them in. And there was somebody that gave a heads up to this truck that would park outside of the school, and they would see these big metal detectors and say, oh, I brought my phone to school today. They would go in and drop it off at this car that's like a converted ice cream truck for $3 a day. that entrepreneur made $800 to $1,000 every day that a school decided to do a screening of their devices coming to those schools. And it's, completely counterproductive. They had the biggest absence rates on those days because students would literally come in and make a decision. Do I leave my phone with this person that I don't know, get in trouble, or do I just ditch today? And that was at the high school level in New York. And that was, granted, 4 years ago, and things have changed. And where I live in Virginia, students are allowed to bring their phones to school, but they have to be in a clear zip bag, and they have to be in the backpack the whole time, right? Teachers can say, if you have your mobile device, you can bring it out for this assignment if they want, but literally they showed me the bag because we're doing an after school program right now in Virginia, and they have to put it in there. And one of the first days they asked me when we were talking, what is going to be your cell phone policy? And, those are things that I wasn't, as a teacher educator, I wasn't in the schools all the time. So that's something that didn't cross my mind. And I think because it is different in the US, it's state by state, it's district by district, school by school making those decisions.
So I think it's really important to give a political context here. So in the UK and in Europe, things tend to be a little bit more centralized. For example, all of people within a country may have a similar curriculum. We don't have that in the States. Everything is developed by each state alone. And even within the state, there are individual, what Ray referred to as LEA, local educational agencies, school districts, schools themselves, councils, board of trustees, that may have different policies that differ from the state policies. It's a very fragmented, autonomous system that creates a lot of inequality in different areas. And that's why the US has major inequality, not only in socioeconomic status, but also in educational outcomes and, in our practices as well.
Okay, fantastic. So there are two questions that we'll do, two more from the audience. The first one is, can you tell us about technology and homework?
Technology and what?
Homework.
Homework. I think I bit off more than I can chew with this project. I thought that this was going to be the best way forward for, speaking of this specific paper, of integrating homework. And I went into schools that did not have a culture of homework in their school, in their PE classes. So it was not well receptive. Students rebelled, the teachers were half on board, half not. And I think any homework that you do, and I think this comes with flipped classrooms with technology, you need to slowly integrate it in, little by little. And it needs to be a buy-in for all of the teachers at that school. And even if it's a middle school, in the US, you have a 6th, 7th, 8th, right? It just needs to be done in the 6th grade to start, so they understand. In physical education, this is the homework requirement in 6th grade, and then when they move to 7th and 8th, it's not something new. So even if you do it at the elementary level, at 4th grade, you start having some flipped classroom lessons, and then do that instead of dropping it in on every single person the whole time. So I think the lesson I learned is little by little, start small, and if you start in the first year of that school or some threshold, so it's not too much too soon.
Okay, fantastic. That's good, great advice. And so the last question, or the last big question, is it's actually directed directly to Dylan, and it says, can you ask Dylan about the impact of social media on young people's perceptions of gender, particularly in relation to body image, health, and fitness? Big question.
Yeah, so there are empirical articles that are coming out, research articles that are coming out that are showing. So the old school kind of way of looking at this is to see how social media, how print media, how different forms of media affect the way, especially young women and girls, but more recently how men and young boys and masculinities feel about their body. But actually, the stuff that we're getting out now is that these students are speaking back to that. They're saying these are actually not appropriate representations of this, and they're undermining or subverting these things. So social media is a tool not only in a way that it formulates people's ideas, but it also creates a counterculture to these things. Something that I find really fascinating right now is the body positive movement on TikTok, which is an app for young kids. It's like 15-second little clips, and there are a bunch of people who are actually extremely body positive. And one example of a theme was things I don't wear to school because I'm afraid my friends will make fun of me, but they'll wear it on this video. And there are people who come out and support these folks for doing it, and they tend to be larger individuals. There are also other things around, breaking down gender binaries, right? So young men dressing up a little bit more feminine and young women dressing up more masculine. So it's a complex question, it's a convoluted question, but I don't think that we can take it as a top-down thing where social media forms students' opinions and just essentially like indoctrinates them in a way, but rather it's giving these students an opportunity to speak back to normative messages about the body, about health, and about gender expression.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much. That's really a great answer and very helpful. So the last question is then, what would be your main advice for people considering technology? So anyone with a responsibility for young people, what would be in a nutshell, your advice for them?
I would say start small, take a class, a few students, a subgroup, and like we would do in research, we would do a pilot study to make sure that bigger study, bigger implementation doesn't fall flat. And that's what we're doing in our, we have an online master's degree, and the students are implementing a small piece of tech this upcoming week in their classes, and they've chosen small populations to try it with before they go in for a larger implementation. And set realistic expectations. Some students will not enjoy it, and you need to kind of understand that, just like you would teach any other topic. There are students that are not enjoying it outwardly, but they might still get that lesson or get that meaning of that lesson, even though they outwardly are not showing interest in it.
So my take-home message would be, don't use technology as a way to individualize health and physical activity. In other words, in many cases, technology is used for self-reflection, but rather use technology as a way to look at social issues in health and physical activity and wellness. Use it as a way to explore built environments. Use it as a way to deconstruct gender norms. Use it as a way for allowing these students to be advocates in health and physical activity for their communities, for their countries, for wherever they are. Recognize that students have agency, and they can use this as, I don't want to say weapon, but as a tool to create change within their communities to better all people, rather than those who just are privileged.
All right.
That Dylan stole a little bit of my thunder. Dylan, he summed it up very nicely. But for teachers, really, as physical educators, you have to be advocates. Digital is here; it's not going anywhere. Only innovation waiting to happen. And if you choose to wait, then you're going to be listening to the same. Often in the United States, for teachers, professional development gets old. We go through the same cycles of PD. So the only people that can change that is the teachers themselves, in terms of advocating to your principals, advocating to your administrators, and being on committees. Sit on a committee, bring in an innovative resource such as Open CPD. Really start pushing the edge in terms of, like I think one of, either Dylan or Risto mentioned it early, really, integrating, computer science, constructivism, students having, being able to construct their environment, create routines, create new activities, and then putting those activities into application type classes where they can develop technology with the English or the math teacher. So it's really just teachers being on committees, having a voice and not always sitting back and saying, well, policy says I have to do this, rather than jumping ahead and saying, hold on, digital is changing everything we're doing in the classroom. As Risto mentioned, he's preparing online classes. I mean, we're on an online webinar right now, so teachers just really need to jump in and start being innovative.
Yeah.
I agree with Ray. I think the ship is leaving the harbor and you're either on it or not, right? There's going to be 200 billion connected devices by 2025. We look at just 2007, if you would have made an investment into a silly little thing called an iPhone, right? You'd be pretty well off. Like, it's moving so fast. And if we're not there changing, and that's why I got into developing our online programs too, because I want to make sure that the rigor is there in higher education. I want to make sure that I'm making those decisions and not outsourcing it to another company to come in and do it, or an adjunct that doesn't have the same interest that I do for our students. So I think it's the same in, K to 12, pre-K to 12 education. It's, you need to be on that board and you need to be pushing that innovation forward, because otherwise people are going to make that decision for you no matter what.
Okay. Great tips, great advice for everybody. I'm sure it's been fantastic and people are going to take a lot away from this, but I'm sure they'll go away and think about, I want to know more. Where can they find out more from you?
We're on Twitter. You can find me at Risto Martinen, if you know how to spell that, or just look me up on George Mason University. You can find my faculty profile there and link through that to the Twitter. You can follow our brand new Instagram, Mason_Fed, PHED. And that is where you'll get all of our information on what we're doing at the teacher education level at George Mason University.
My Twitter's at Dylan Randy. That's my name, a lot more easier than his. I'm also on Facebook because I'm older. And you can email me. Just look up my information on Towson University's website. I also have ResearchGate, so I post all of the pre-prints of my papers. So if you want to read a paper, it won't look fancy because it's not the article version from the journal, but it's all the same information and all the same content. And I'm pretty sure if I went through like all my stuff from when I was younger, I could re-find my MySpace password as well.
And I'm sorry, Ray, to cut you up. I forgot to plug our podcast. I'm going to use this opportunity to do so. So we have a podcast called Playing with Research in Health and Physical Education. You can find that. That's where Viggie's been on there. We have Dylan on there as well. So we have a lot of scholars on there that have come on. You can find that in all of the podcast sites. So, Ray, sorry.
Nah, I need to apologize. Really, we're all colleagues, so where you can find Risto and Dylan, chances are you'll find me not too close. But, if you want to reach out to me as teachers, I'm on LinkedIn. So that's my social media platform of choice right now. Really, LinkedIn is a great way to really start getting to know individuals from a professional standpoint in terms of that, teacher educators, other teachers in the field. So you can find me there, Ray Frederick III, on LinkedIn, or you can go to my Queens College CUNY University website.
Okay, fantastic. And on the course, all these links to that information has been provided, so you can access Risto's Twitter if you can't pronounce his name from that, and also the LinkedIn, the different university accounts, the ResearchGate, everything. And you'll also be able to find this in the comments box on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. So thank you ever so much. It's been a really interesting conversation. And yeah, I'm sure people will be following more.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you.